I think Silicon Valley wants to think of itself as a tolerant place. It aspires to be this place where it's a true meritocracy and people who work hard can succeed, and look at all these people who came from nothing and were very successful, but it's not an even track to that success.
How does meritocracy function or fail to exist in Silicon Valley? Quite simply, meritocracy is not at play due to the underpayment of foreign workers with the skill and merit of their American counterparts, the lack of success among startups, and the disparage of diversity in the workforce. It shows us how not all, but a select group can achieve in this Silicon Valley. Since the late 1990s, the tech industry has been lobbying Congress to increase the number of H-1B visas, claiming that there was a shortage of high-skilled workers in the region. We know now that this was not true, and in fact, it's still not true today. H-1B visas are intended to offer foreign workers a threshold of 6 years to work in the United States before being required to return to their home country, unless they find a legal path to citizenship. Why does this matter? Because in 2016, 50% of the tech high-skilled workforce was Asian, and an overwhelming majority of this 50% were based on H-1B visas. H-1B visas do not explicitly allow tech companies to underpay workers, but seem to be related with underpayment in companies that utilize H-1B visa program more than others. This is clearly non-meritocratic, especially when companies are legally supposed to advertise jobs first to American citizens prior to offering them to their foreign competition. However, recently the Trump administration has drafted an immigration order that directly affects H-1B workers in an effort to reduce the numbers of foreign workers in the states, although tech companies are claiming that it affects their current workers. The representation of the community in the Silicon Valley is oddly not similar. Women, who make up 59% of the US workforce, only make up 30% of tech. Ethnic minorities remain underrepresented. Despite the rise of Asian American workers to 50% in 2010, other minorities, primarily blacks and Latinos, find themselves coming in at 2.2% and 4.2%. A recent example of this is a report that looks at Apple's overwhelmingly white male employment, or Uber's recent issues of company-wide sexism. In my interview with Laura Nichols of the Sociology Department, she stated that a large part of the lack of diversity within the tech industry is due to the lack of exposure of STEM and the lack of funding in schools where communities are primarily of color. She cited government actions of the 50s and 60s which redlined neighborhoods by race and class, which directly impacted education, as poor minority families were subject to poor schooling due to the funding of local schools coming from property taxes. This, of course, had long-lasting effects, as these same communities of color exist, and this form of 21st century segregation adds to the inability of students to compete with their peers in wealthier neighborhoods, who are more likely to get a better education. Another large issue is the college graduation rates for people of color is quite low. She referenced this as a major issue for the Black and Latino communities, suggesting that their lower socioeconomic status may cause them to return home to support their families in times of struggle. And lastly, the third major reason why meritocracy just does not exist in Silicon Valley: 9 out of 10 startups fail and never see the light of day. Usually funded by elitist venture capitalists that are bereft of meritocracy and fail to identify with the engineers and the founders of most startups and aim only to increase their profit margins. That being said, why is it so prevalent that startups fail? Is there not an influx of successful and highly skilled workers in the area? Well, this is true. Not every talented individual will succeed. They also need connections, and the ability to connect and network is far more selective and accessible to those who are in the elite. For those who are socioeconomically well off and have joined clubs, it's clear that Silicon Valley is far from meritocracy. In fact, having talent is only half the battle of entering the closed community that is the Silicon Valley. So how can it become meritocracy, if at all? The answers lie in fixing a decades-old education system that systematically discriminates against communities of color, promoting STEM studies in public schools in these same communities to help assuage the diversity problem in the Valley, and overall overhauling the corporate culture, and lastly, perhaps most importantly, revamping the Silicon Valley corporate culture, which is reminiscent of the typical